Welcome to Priceless Takes.
And we are live from the Gold Coast, Australia. Welcome back, everyone, to Priceless Takes, episode 73. I am Luka, he is Chris. We are two very happy podcasters today because we are triumphant in our victory, correctly predicting the 2025 Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. And Chris, you yourself are the Philadelphia fan of our show. Despite myself being right, you are the main man when it comes to this stuff. Before we get into it, please talk about the day, the emotions. How are you feeling right now as an Eagles fan?
Luca, I think I've been vindicated. I think Jalen Hurts has been vindicated. I think the Eagles as a team have been vindicated. I think today they've really come out on top and really handily given a smattering of what many consider to be the best team in football. So I think everyone's really happy right now.
Yeah, well, listen, Chris, you got the jersey, I got the shades. It feels good to be right. It feels good to be right. I'll say you were definitely right more so than I was, Chris. You were like bang on the score prediction. Chris, you had the score 37-22, if you remember, and
Yep.
40 to
Yep.
22. Like, we can talk about how the score got there, but you were pretty much bang on. I, on the other hand, was not bang on at all. I was pretty close to the score prediction if the game had have ended in the first quarter. But overall, it was still a defensive battle. Just like only one defense was doing actual good defense. So I mean, I'll take half a win from me. But let's get straight into it, guys. We're going to talk everything about Super Bowl, and then we're going to look into the future and talk about these two teams prospectively, as well as a few other things that we think are going to potentially happen around the NFL. The Eagles absolutely annihilated the Chiefs 40-22 after going up 24-0 at half and 34-0 into the third quarter. Chris, I don't know if you know this, they were 2 points away, the Eagles, from tying the biggest shutout margin in a Super Bowl game. That was 36-0, which was set in the Denver Broncos Seattle Super Bowl some years ago. So they weren't quite there, but they were knocking on the doorstep of that feat. Jalen Hurts, Chris, all of the critics doubted, in my opinion, at least 17-22, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 silly INT, which kind of ruined his perfect game because I thought it was a silly one, but he still threw it. But the rushing touchdown, Mahomes, 21-32, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 1 lost fumble. Chris, we know what happened in this game. I guess we'll see. What was the biggest reason the Eagles won? We know Saquon maybe didn't have the impact we thought. The receivers, talk to me through this game.
Well, Luca, when I sat here a couple days ago trying to tell you that this was not the Chiefs team of old, and I sat here and I tried to tell you that this Patrick Mahomes was not your typical Patrick Mahomes, you didn't believe me. And I'm sure you believe me now, Luca. Because even though we have this is essentially the tale of what the Chiefs season was all season. You saw a lot of pretty scores, a lot of pretty points, and a really pretty 15-1 looking record, but it was empty. And just like looking at this box score, 257 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, anyone that watched the game knew. Anyone that watched
Chris,
the
you there?
game, yep. Anyone that watched the game knew that was not the story of the game. 257 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions was not the story of the game. What we really had here was a 0 touchdown, 2 interception, 50-yard horror from Patrick Mahomes. So even though my defense played so well and the offense played so efficiently, I'm putting a lot of blame here on the lack of morale that the defense could really never get from any points being scored on the offensive end, and Patrick Mahomes disappearing, frankly, in a way we haven't seen since he played Tom Brady.
Do you think it was him disappearing, or do you think the Eagles' defense made him disappear, Chris? Because
I
I saw an
I
Eagles.
think I think for all his magicianry and how good he is, he should have at least put some points on the board, Luca, regardless of how good the the Eagles defense was. Even I don't give them as much credit as the Chiefs somehow gave them today, and it was pretty ridiculous. The fact that you couldn't even get a field goal on this defense on a team that has been touting itself as one of the most greatest and efficient offensives ever.
Yeah, Chris, I don't know. I just feel like we've seen this movie before with the Brady Super Bowl. Like, I'm interested to see when the stats will come out because in the Brady Super Bowl, they said Mahomes had like 500 yards like behind the line of scrimmage
Hmm.
just running around. I'm interested to see how the statistics of that play in this game because quite frankly, it just seemed like the Eagles were getting home with four, and that's something that teams haven't been able to do this season when they've versed the Chiefs. They've always needed to send the extra man, which will always leave someone open for Mahomes to target. But the Eagles were getting home with four, and it was the others that we were expecting more so. You know, Josh Sweat had 2.5 sacks. Milton Williams forced the fumble. You know, we were
Hmm.
also worried about Jalen Carter, and I think the Eagles. Sorry, the Chiefs to a certain extent, Chris, were worried so much about Jalen Carter. They forgot about all these other guys that Philadelphia have on the defense too.
I
And
also
they were the
think,
ones that wrecked the game.
Luke, I also think what happened was the entire Chiefs organization was so obsessed with how to shut down Saquon Barkley that it seemed like they had
Yes.
revised none of the rest of the homework.
Well, yeah, I think that's more so. I think that's more so a different topic of, I guess, the Eagles' offensive success, which I do want to get into a lot more later. But just staying on track with the Chiefs, they also just did not show the ability to run the ball at all. And, you know,
Correct.
they just put it into Mahomes' hands and said, you have to do it from the get-go. They didn't even try run the ball, Chris. They were 7 for
Correct,
24.
Luca.
The
But
three running backs, seven
even
carries for 24 yards in the entire game.
even what we get told is the most infamous and notorious playoff connection between Travis Kelce and Mahomes. Travis was dropping balls, open balls that I was scared that he was going to
Well, I
catch
think
all
Mahomes is
day.
also throwing. I give a lot of like Mahomes was missing a lot of throws, Chris.
And
Like,
those interceptions were bad interceptions, Luca. They were bad interceptions.
yes, I do agree with that.
And
I
the difference between the Chiefs interception and the Eagles interception was when the Eagles got an interception, they immediately went, took that ball and converted it for points or converted it for real yardage to get to a field goal. When Jalen Hurts had that interception, it was over. It just went on downs
Yes, well,
and
that's
had no
because,
effect on
well,
the game.
as we know, Chris, all turnovers aren't created equally. And, you know, Jalen
Correct.
Hurts' interception ended up on the 2 yard line, right? Whereas Mahomes' interception, everyone was all over the field anyway because he'd rolled out of the pocket. Everyone was sort of all over the shop. And Cooper DeJean was waiting the entire time, just like Zach Bourne was. And we saw that was the common theme watching those interceptions back. I did just before the show. They were just spying Mahomes the entire time, just waiting and waiting and waiting. I don't think the first, they were both bad interceptions. I agree. The first interception, okay, Mahomes rolled out. He tried to make a play, and DeJean read it like a book. The second interception, Mahomes just flatly missed the throw, and that's also because when you watch it back, Milton Williams pushes the offensive lineman into Mahomes, and as he's stepping into his throwing motion, his leg gets knocked a tiny bit, and whether that was the result of the throw or not, that was a bad throw because great play by Bourne, but the receiver was miles away from the ball. He was running a slant route going outwards, and Mahomes basically threw it like it was like a back shoulder. He was going to come inside, but
Well,
Zach
look at
Bourne
that.
just picked it off. They were just spying him.
That's what I'm saying. Mahomes disappeared when they needed him most.
Yes, but whether that's Mahomes simply disappearing on his own or the Philly defense erasing him, I think is a bigger question. Do you think it was more about just Mahomes, or do you think it was the defense of Philadelphia that did that to him in
I
this game?
I think it was a good mix. I think Mahomes in of itself, maybe the moment got to him surprisingly. I think that the defense were really, really, really good at capitalizing on mistakes that they were picking up. And so that meant that every single little, because you're coming to play the Super Bowl, this ain't just a regular season game. And it meant every small moment that was a little mistake was exemplified and blown out to be so much bigger because this Eagles defense was really good at picking those up and turning those into big plays.
Why do you think Kansas City didn't run the ball, Chris? Kareem Hunt had 64 yards in the AFC Championship game. Mahomes had another 43. But from the get-go, they just did not think the run was going to be it. Like, do you think it was a
Because
flawed game plan by the coaching staff?
I think it's a bit too prompt. I think it has to do with the reason a lot of the teams this season have failed in the postseason. For some reason, NFL teams love to change from their game plan and decide to do something completely different come their biggest game of the season. And I can talk that about the Bills, who went from distributing the ball to just dunking it to Josh Allen. I can tell you, sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. I can sit here and tell you about the Bills, who went from distributing to just giving it in the hands of Josh Allen every play. I could tell you about the Baltimore Ravens, who went from running the ball with Derrick Henry to deviating from that and giving it to Lamar Jackson. And I think in this moment, they sort of went to, oh, we're going to give it to eventually Patrick Mahomes and sort of rely on this ability of his to distribute to everyone at every time. And frankly, that was not going to be enough in this game.
Yeah, but Chris, there's a bit of a like 7 carries, Chris. Like James Cook, for what it's worth, he had double the amount of carries. Derrick Henry still had the carries, Chris. Like 7 carries between their 3 running backs. Like I'm just looking at the drives now. First drive, 4 plays, pass, 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 pass. Second drive, 3 plays, pass, run, pass. Third drive, 3 plays,
I think
pass,
I,
pass.
I think
Fourth
the thing
drive,
was,
before the
Luca,
interception, sack, pass.
they
Like,
didn't
that's
they didn't
what, 3,
have a
6,
run
9,
game
13
this year.
plays. Their first 13 plays, 12 of them were passes, one of them were rushes. They didn't even try to establish the run at all. And I feel like that played into Philadelphia's hands.
Correct. I think it made them really predictable. It made it really obvious to see what was coming forward, especially when you didn't have when you cut out your run game and you didn't really have that many reliable receivers in the end. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins didn't really play that big of a role. Marquise Brown didn't play that big of a role, and Travis Kelce never really got anything going. And so it meant that you really had no one except Xavier Worthy, and that's exactly what it came to.
It reminded me, I guess I sort of agree with you to an extent. It reminded me more so of the Ravens in last year's AFC Championship game than it did, I guess, this year. Because this year, when they could, they still tried to establish the run with Derrick Henry. But they flat out in the AFC Championship game last year just said, Lamar needs to win us this game because we need Lamar to prove to everyone that he can be a pocket passer. And it
Mm,
backfired on them. And it kind of seemed like everyone was like, this is Mahomes' moment. He's going for the three-peat. He might be better than
correct.
Brady if he pulls off this three-peat. And it seemed like it kind of got to them a little bit because they were like, wait a minute. As good as Mahomes is, you need to think about the actual team here. And it seemed like everything had to be Mahomes, 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 Mahomes. And it just completely backfired on them. And it got to the point of no return because Philadelphia ran up the score. You couldn't run the ball at that point. Then it had to be a throwing game. And that's why I don't get
And
because
Luca, I
Philadelphia,
think
it's not like Philly scored on their first possession of the game, Chris, right? Like
correct.
this Kansas City defense held like 5 plays, 10 yards. If you're Kansas City, you're thinking, okay, we're going to come in here. And I was actually a bit nervous, Chris, when I saw the first drive of the Eagles. I thought if Kansas City go and put 7 points on the board here, this could, maybe make Jalen Hurts and the Eagles a bit nervous. But then the Eagles were just playing a physical brand of football and they didn't even try throw the ball. And I didn't
And Luca,
understand that early in the game.
I think the other thing was it was really strange to see on behalf of someone like Patrick Mahomes. But in the second quarter, he looked properly helpless. He looked helpless. It was written on his face. It was written on the Chiefs players' faces. They came off, and it didn't look like there was hope. And you want to talk on we you want to talk about on a greater level Brady and Mahomes. If you go back and watch some of Brady's big comebacks, 28-3 and such, he never had that look on his face. It seems that it's really easy in these games to get into Mahomes' head, and I don't know if that's gonna leave him through age or wisdom or whatever. But if you're able to get some big points up on him, especially in which the situation calls for him to be the bigger man and you're outshining him, it gets into his head, and that has a flow-on effect, especially when you don't have that many weapons in the garage.
Yeah, listen, I agree, Chris, and I sort of prefaced this in the first thing. We have seen Mahomes struggle in Super Bowls before. I don't know if you saw the graphic, but he's tied for second. Sorry, tied for second all time in Super Bowl interceptions of 7. Only John Elway with 8 has more. They showed that graphic during the game. And we've seen Mahomes struggle in some Super Bowls. And I guess we'll pivot in later in the show about how this sort of affects the Mahomes Brady thing. But I want to pivot to Saquon, Chris, because you sort of mentioned it. We both sort of mentioned it, but I guess none of us really sort of analyzed the scenario of what would happen if Saquon was shut down. We sort of glossed over it a little bit, but 57 yards, 25 carries, 2.3 yards a carry, Chris. But Jalen Hurts had 72 yards himself. So. Were you surprised with what happened with Saquon, and how do you think that allowed Jalen Hurts to flourish in this game?
Look, I was more surprised that they were able to shut down Saquon so well, but it seemed that that's all they did well, was shut down Saquon. They didn't do much of anything else. They didn't stop the run from Jalen Hurts. They didn't stop the pass over the middle, which happened twice, as I was telling you about Dallas Goedert. They didn't stop any of the distribution to Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. It was almost as if they had given him so much space in the pocket, they were daring Jalen Hurts to pass. And that's exactly what he did. He passed, right? During the start of the game, initially felt like he was a bit scared. He was leaving a good pocket early. He was breaking the pocket early, frankly. And I was like, oh no, this is going to be another game where the passing is weak and he leaves it. But once it became really, really clear that they were giving him the space, he grew comfortable into his own and he distributed. And the thing was, the way they shut down Saquon was the way everyone's been saying to the last week and a half, which was crash the box. And that's exactly what happened. They crashed players with the box. But of course, Nick Sirianni and the Eagles were listening to the chatter out there. And so they were able to draw up plays and distribute for everyone else. So do I think that it was surprising that Saquon was shut down? To an extent, yes, because he's such a force and beast in nature. But then again, it didn't really matter because they were able to fill in the gaps with what they had.
And Chris, the other thing as well is, it wasn't necessarily that they shut down Saquon. It was more so they just shut him down specifically as a running back, Chris, because he still had 40 receiving yards in this game.
Correct.
So really when we say shut down, like shutting down Saquon, him having 57 rushing yards, we're like, wow, they did a really good job. But he still had 97 scrimmage yards in total, which is below Saquon's standards. By no means is that shutting Saquon down at all.
He had more rushing yards than the entire Kansas City side combined.
No, I was going to say double. Not quite double, because Mahomes had 25, but he had double the amount of rushing yards that the Chiefs running backs had between the three of them.
Which is really quite crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, listen, I think it completely played into the Eagles' hands, and you hit the nail on the head perfectly. They were just so focused on stopping Saquon, and I think Kansas City went into that game thinking Jalen Hurts can't beat us if we dare him to. And Chris, we saw the early sort of penalty on AJ Brown in like the very first possession.
That was a very questionable penalty.
I completely agree.
They got the call back. I think the next. They got a makeup call the next series of downs. I don't exactly remember where. It might have been on the defense, but I remember thinking that this is a makeup for the previous one.
Yeah, but again, to give you credit, Chris, you were completely right. Those Philadelphia receivers, they were winning those one-on-one battles against those Kansas City defenders.
And it was not even close. It was not even close.
No,
Jalen Watson, like I said, Jalen Watson's a bum. He's no match for Devonta Smith, and that's exactly what he did. He mossed him. He mossed him all day, and it was beautiful. I had never seen anything like that.
Well, listen, they were giving everyone work. AJ Brown was giving McDuffie that work too. And McDuffie's a great player. At least I think he's a great player. Like all pro last 2 seasons, and AJ Brown was giving him that work, and they really had the edge in this game.
I also want to note Patrick Mahomes had a fumble here as well.
Yes. What about the fumble?
Two interceptions and a fumble. So he's played a completely messy game on all ends, and I don't know what's going to happen after this. How much of the blame is going to go to Patrick Mahomes and how much of it's going to go to roster creation? Because he, frankly, has not been given enough weapons around him, especially when compared to a luxurious villa like the Eagles that have got everything. And another thing on top of that, we really need to talk about Matt Nagy. He's not the right coordinator for Mahomes. The only reason they've gotten past this far is because Mahomes is Mahomes. Matt Nagy is not the right one. You need someone with an explosive, young offensive mind who's able to get the
But
ball distributed.
isn't not Eric Bieniemy, Andy Reid calling the plays anyway?
I don't believe Andy Reid's calling the plays all the time.
Really?
I think it's a bit of a contributive mix, but obviously that offensive mastermind and input still comes from Matt Nagy.
Well, we saw Bieniemy not get head coaching jobs because he wasn't calling the plays, quote unquote. And Matt Nagy was the offensive coordinator before Bieniemy was, and I think that so much of a Chiefs' success has been predicated on the like Andy Reid's, intelligence and ability to
They
be a play
actually
caller.
tried to run a couple quick trick plays, and the Eagles literally shut them down at the line of scrimmage. And that's all props to the Eagles. I'll have to get the timestamps for that, but I know for some extreme spots where they try to do a couple laterals, quick laterals, and the Eagles were able to shut that down. But Luca, I actually want to know who surprised you most on the Eagles defense this game?
On the Eagles defense,
Correct.
look, there's a lot of candidates, to be completely honest with you. Um, I think, well, the most obvious one is Josh Sweat. But if I'm being honest, I think it was Cooper DeJean because I think that play that he made just completely turned the game around. And at being a rookie as well, like being able to make that play in that moment, I think that was just
That
incredible.
was huge. It
And
was
we've
huge.
seen Mahomes face like a lot of good secondaries this year. And like I think for me that was really who I would give the nod to. He
My
played really well, particularly when his counterpart, Quinion Mitchell, like wasn't really having his name called a bunch of times
mm,
throughout the game. Cooper DeJean was right there, and he made a couple of other really good plays. So the first play of the game, he made a good tackle. Like he was there, he was buzzing around, he was
my
in and around the
my
action.
unsung hero this game is going to be Jake Elliott. Actually, after having a
Really?
after
How so?
having a lot of struggles this season in general,
Yeah, but
having a lot of
his
struggles in the postseason.
contribution didn't impact the
Of
game.
course, but he played a clean game, and that's exactly what he needed to do, right? There was a weird moment where they were kicking the 43-yard field goal. They called the neutral zone infraction on the Chiefs line, and somehow we still got the penalty. We
Mm.
got the penalty. He goes from 48 yards and still drills it. I think that's good. I think it's a good sign for his confidence going forward. I think
Yeah, well, Jake
he
Elliott
played a tough game.
definitely outplayed his counterpart in Butker, who really did not have
Never
much
got
to
the
do at all
chance.
apart from, kick the ball off.
Correct.
Um, yeah, Chris, there's a lot of things for me in this game, but the fumble with Mahomes, I think, like, he was just getting bum rushed. Like, Milton Williams came across, like, and you saw what happened. I forgot who the second player was. It might have been Jalen Carter, it might have been Josh Sweat. But you saw once Milton Williams punched the ball out of his arm, like, the second defensive player just came and absolutely walloped him in the face. Like, he was just getting pressured. And like we said, we've seen this movie before, and the Chiefs made significant off-season moves. They traded Tyreek Hill, okay? They beefed up the offensive line. They
That
went
was a
out.
while ago, Luca. That was a while ago. Trading Tyreek Hill was a
No,
while
but
ago.
I'm saying the last time they lost the Super Bowl,
Oh,
the
okay, the
Chiefs
last
made
time. Yeah.
significant moves. That's what I'm sort of alluding to back to this point
Right.
of where do the Chiefs go from here? We've seen them make significant moves when they lost Super Bowl. They traded Tyreek Hill. They went and got Joe Tooney, okay? Big free agent. Now,
Luca,
I
that
think
was one of the big issues as well. The reason the Eagles were able to get so much pressure without blitzing was because that there was a hole in the line, particularly in that
but there
area.
were holes everywhere in the line, Chris, because Joe Tooney's a guard who had to come across to left tackle, and then you had the backup something else coming in to play right guard, and it was just all
It was a
all
mess. It was a
shambles. It
mess.
was
It was
just
a
all
shambles.
shambles, and they
Correct.
didn't know the protections are getting blown every time, and they were just getting absolutely
It
bum
was
rushed off the edge.
it was just interesting to see that in a matchup in which a lot of people considered the Chiefs to be the superior of, it did not seem like they were the same level of team. It seemed like the Chiefs were a vastly under-equipped team against a superiorly at some moments it looked like the Eagles were better coached than the Chiefs because they were so well executed. Every single play was so well executed.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think Philadelphia's coaching staff deserves a lot of credit. We obviously saw the news about Kellen Moore. We'll probably talk about that later in the show. But yeah, I think they deserve a lot of credit for how they approached this game. And I also want to give credit to Vic Fangio because all I've been hearing was, oh, he's 0-8 against Mahomes in the playoffs.
That was the most
You
rubbish.
know,
That was the
I
most
was,
rubbish empty stat line.
I was there saying it too, just to be a bit of devil's advocate. He was consulting in the first Super Bowl against the Eagles. I was in there and amongst it. But Chris, I think that huge credit to Sirianni. I hate to think what that's going to do to his ego now, but and we need to start having conversations about him, and also about Howie Roseman too, his ability to get good offensive coordinators good coordinators in general and provide a good staff. But Chris, I think back to the Chiefs, I think the offensive line, similar to the Brady Super Bowl, is going to be the biggest thing. Because it's not like we've seen Mahomes play great in Super Bowls, okay? And the two times we haven't seen him play great in Super Bowls, yes, he could have played better, but he's been running for his life. And it was the left side of the line that completely cooked them. I was just looking at it now because Joe Tooney was playing in left guard. He moved out to left tackle, which made Caliendo, who was a backup, come in to play left guard. And that was just where they were getting all sorts of problems coming from the left side of that line, which is also Mahomes' blind spot too. So
Yeah.
that was just... It was a mess. It was a complete mess.
I think they had a really high drop back rate. They were able to get Pat Mahomes to drop back at extremely high rate, and they were able to get pressure on him at extremely high rate without doing the blitz, without doing
Exactly. They didn't blitz a single time in that game. And that was what I was saying before, is teams had struggled to be able to blitz Mahomes because he was so good against the blitz, but they didn't need to blitz him because they were just getting so much pressure regardless. And
Correct.
that was something I think more so you rather than anything, because I was having this conversation with you. I was saying, well, listen, the Eagles defense in the last Super Bowl had 70 sacks, like that was an all-time record. How is this defense actually going to be better? And I don't know if it was the defensive game plan necessarily. I don't know if the Chiefs' offensive line was better in the first Super Bowl, but Philadelphia found a way. And it was the young guys, Chris. And I think that might be something maybe as well. This was a young pass rush, okay? Very, very young pass rush.
Extremely.
And we saw in the first Super Bowl, Philadelphia, they had some older guys in there. So maybe that was the difference. But
we
Chris,
had BG come back as well. Brandon
did,
Graham.
yeah.
And he was no slouch. He was putting in the effort.
I completely agree, Chris. I want to sort of go a bit more future spec now. Chances of Kansas City getting back to the Super Bowl, scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the path looks like for them next year?
I think if you put that in conversation, we need to talk about the opposition. I think Kansas City caught him at a really good time. I think Josh Allen's going to be coming back stronger. Lamar Jackson is going to be coming back stronger. Justin Herbert's going to be coming back retooled.
Don't say Justin Herbert before Joe Burrow, Chris. Don't do that.
Sorry, I apologize.
We know Joe Burrow's coming back way stronger than the Chargers are, right?
Extremely stronger. So I would have them at a 5 or a 6. I just think them going to the Mount 3 times, coming back for a 4th, coming off a quite crushing loss. 34-0. In my mind, it's always going to be 34-0.
Which is fair enough.
I don't put it at extremely high, at 5 or 6, simply because he's Patrick Mahomes, and you should know the reason.
Yeah, I sort of give them a bit of a higher chance than you, just because Patrick Mahomes, at the end of the day, is still their quarterback. We've still seen him do wondrous things in this league, but I think this is a loss that, for a lot of franchises, maybe not the Chiefs, because we have seen them maintain such a high level of consistency and excellence. But this is a loss that can just completely take the life out of a franchise. To get back to back and then to be so close, to be right there for that three-peat, right? And to be absolutely demolished, that could just absolutely send shockwaves in your franchise that maybe not even Mahomes is going to be able to overcome. I'm interested to see free agency moves. We'll talk about that maybe in a later episode. But I'm going to give the Chiefs a 7 to make it back to the
Wow.
Super Bowl.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
I still think with Mahomes, and we've seen him dominate the AFC,
Hmm.
he could still go back to the Super Bowl next year and lose. Like I'm not saying win the Super Bowl. To win the Super Bowl next year, obviously a lot harder. But I think with the landscape of the AFC right now, I think Mahomes um, can definitely get back to the Super Bowl. On the other side of the coin, Chris, what chance do you give the Eagles of repeating next year and getting back? I want to say winning the Super Bowl next year, not just getting back to. What? How do you view that?
Look, I don't want to jump the gun. It's been less than 12 hours. I want to enjoy the victory.
Fair enough.
But look, I think that the Eagles like you said, they have a really, really young team, really solid team. I'm interested to see what kind of deals they get everyone on. I think if anything, they have a couple years left of rookie deals. After that, they're going to run into salary cap issues, simply because they have so much talent. But for now, given the vibes, winning the Super Bowl, everything that there is, I might give them a slight hangover, but I think they're a bit different in the way that they steel themselves and they prepare themselves. I'm giving them a 7 or an 8 coming back here. I think the NFC is not that strong either. The NFC has been shocked and rocked by what's happened, particularly Detroit and a couple other areas. Are really going to have a good hard look at themselves. And interdivisionally within the NFC East, I know the Cowboys want to make a resurgence, but obviously us winning is not going to help. The Commanders also going to, evaluate their position and where they're going to be sitting in a couple months. So I think given all of that, I would be stronger if it was um, a team that was a bit more concrete in its position. Maybe we got the 1 seed, but for now, I'm gonna put that at 7 to 8 to come back here.
Yeah, listen, Chris, how do you view the loss of Kellen Moore? Kellen Moore expected to be the New Orleans Saints head coach at the start of next year. We've seen half of this movie before, I guess, with the Eagles losing coordinators. I think there is a 0% chance that Fangio leaves because I doubt he is going to be getting a head coaching job. I don't even think, now that I say it, I think, yeah, the Saints was the last job anyway. So Fangio will be back. Kellen Moore leaves. Do you think that has an impact on the Eagles' offense at all and their team dynamic?
Look, I think Kellen Moore has a lot to think about. Obviously, the difference is when he was making the decision last night to today. He has a Super Bowl trophy to his name. He has a ring to his name, and he has he's held a Super Bowl trophy. And those I think are very real considerations. That's why Steve Spagnuolo has stayed with the Chiefs instead of moving on. Obviously, we know that moving into New Orleans is not a great situation that a new coach will want to take on. So I'm not saying that he's 100% leaving. In the situation that he does, I think it's really disappointing for Jalen Hurts. There hasn't been he hasn't had 2 teams in a row, 2 years in a row where he's
Yeah.
had the same offensive coordinator, and I think that does have a real impact. I think he'd rather prefer having him here. But then again, when you got so much talent with the Eagles, your hiring process is so bulletproof. You got one of the best owners and GMs in the leagues. I think they can easily find a replacement. I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to be too hard missed, but I'd prefer him to stay.
Yeah. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, also, Kellen Moore is still, young, and he's, wants probably to progress his career, whereas Spagnuolo is a bit older, I feel like it's a bit easier for him to sort of, not want to be the head coach as much. And it also does play into the fact that the Chiefs have been that good. If Kellen Moore sees a potential dynasty with the Eagles, then I would definitely consider staying too. Because
Correct.
the Saints' job, yeah, that is a hard job. But we've seen teams be in tough cap situations before, and they've been able to scrape themselves out of it. So give them a couple of years, you never know. But I want to transition to Jalen Hurts, Chris, because we sort of in the NFL sort of perceive we have our little group of 4 quarterbacks at the top. We have Mahomes, we have Lamar, we have Josh, we have
Burrow,
Burrow.
Allen.
That fifth spot, people have tried to say it's Herbert. Now people have tried to say it's Jaden Daniels. Do you think Jalen Hurts has cemented that fifth spot, or do you think he should even be higher?
Do I think he's cemented the fifth spot? In my mind, yes. Simply because he's the only quarterback to go to 2 Super Bowls in the last 4 years and win one, especially against Patrick Mahomes. You look at those people that you mentioned, and their resume has essentially been what have they done against Patrick Mahomes? And he's the only one out of them that has beaten him and arguably played better twice in a Super Bowl with one victory. Josh Allen's career is essentially now he also missed out on the he's the MVP, correct? So
Yeah.
he received the MVP. But up until that point, his career was how good was his best performance against the Chiefs, and he was at 13-second game, which he didn't win. Lamar Jackson's whole idea was how good was he against the Chiefs, and he failed in the AFC Championship. Um, Joe Burrow's whole idea was that he beat Patrick Mahomes in a comeback, 21-3, I believe, in a comeback,
Hmm?
and he advanced to the Super Bowl. That was their whole resume, regardless of what they'd done or how good they were. And if you put Jalen Hurts against that, he's the winner by far. He's one of the most winningest quarterbacks throughout the league, and he plays one of the cleanest games. I just think he's not the flashiest, and therefore, in the eyes of the media and certain people within the media, he's never going to be in the top five. But if you look at it through any sort of objective test, he is in that fifth position.
Yeah. Look, I completely agree, Chris. And I think for me as well, it's sort of, I guess, a similar thing as to why I think I rate Baker very highly. But obviously, Jalen now has done it at a much grander scale. He's a big game player, like in the wild card or in the divisional round, he's not necessarily, throwing the ball around the field, making, the glitz and the glamour. But in the games where he has to have it the most, he saw it in two Super Bowls now, and we've seen it in the San Francisco championship game was a bit of a weird one because of the whole injury to the quarterbacks, whatever. But we've seen him in two Super Bowls and in two championship games do what needs to be done and far exceed the expectations that I think were set for him. And when you look at how people have not been able to beat Patrick Mahomes, and you look at how much credit Joe Burrow did get for beating Patrick Mahomes, I think it would be unjust for Jalen Hurts to not have the claim to that fifth spot, particularly when the other candidates at that position either are also have really are not super proven and it's more talent based, like
And
prospective
Luca,
based,
Luca
and
in the
haven't beaten Mahomes.
in the NFC, if you look at it in terms of quarterbacks, the most mentioned quarterback in terms of better than Hurts is Matthew Stafford, and the reason for that is because he won a Super Bowl, and Jalen Hurts has won a Super Bowl now. That too in a more recent game, and he wins more games in general. And so the question now is, well, is he the Superman of the NFC? And this is going to be a little bit like a Brock Purdy answer because people are going to be like, well, it seems like he's a game manager. And I guarantee you there's going to be people still out there who are going to say that Jalen Hurts is a game manager regardless of the game he's put up. And he's going to have to deal with that, frankly, his whole career because he's more interested in winning than putting up flashy yards. But I still think regardless, just like you and I agree, he's in that fifth spot.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, one more thing I guess I want to ask you before we transition to a bit of news about Aaron Rodgers, more so about Saquon's shelf life. There's been a lot of talks about, how, sustainable can Saquon be. Chris, I was going to give you over under 3.5 as my line,
Three.
but I guess you've answered it for me. I'm thinking
He's
around the same.
Luca. He's a 28-year-old. Been in the league 7 years, I believe. He's had a really, really good run. He's played really well. I think now, if he gives himself maybe one more ring, possibly, I think it's very possible for the Eagles to go out and get one more ring, a couple 1,500, 1,600 more yard seasons, and a lot more magnificent plays, and he could really be looking at a place in the Hall of Fame. I think that's a very real question. But I think from the age he's at, unless his conditioning in Philadelphia is different to his conditioning in New York simply because of his injury history. I'm looking purely at his injury history. I'm thinking he plays really well. I just don't know how durable he is. And for that reason, I think I'm giving him 3 years. I think that according to his contract, that'll be a year extra of really, really useful running back, capabilities at him. But the beauty of it is if they see him going longer term into the future, they can easily take some wear and tear and load off of him and begin to distribute more to AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. So I think they could take some pressure off. So I think they could take some pressure off of him and get that ball out to the other good players and sort of increase his lifespan.
Yeah, listen, Chris, any final words on the Super Bowl before we transition to a bit of New York Jets talk?
I just think it was a great game for the Birds, and the Chiefs are really gonna have to come up with some solutions in the off season if they want to come back into real contention.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna put the shades back on again, Chris, because go Birds.
Go
I'll
Birds!
give you a fly, Eagles fly, baby. Feels good to be right, Chris. I picked, what did I say, 2 out of the last 3 Super Bowls. Last year I took the L, but, in terms of Eagles Chiefs Super Bowls, I'm 2 for
I
2.
mean, look,
So
I
I'll
I
give
had a
myself that.
I had a 37-22.
You
It
did.
wasn't the 22
It
that
was
I was
there. I think,
expecting.
Chris, I think your scoreline was probably the closest scoreline in, dare I say, probably the world. I honestly,
Honestly, I think that might be
yeah,
right because I
yeah,
beat a lot of the pundits. I beat a
yeah,
lot of the NFL hosts,
completely
all of
agree.
them. I think we might have something going here, Luca.
I'm gonna scour the internet far and wide, between my AFC Championship game
We might
score
have to put out a
prediction
claim.
and
We might have
between
to put
your
out
Super Bowl score prediction. We're doing something right.
we might have to put out a claim out on TikTok, and we might have to do a press release that we have
Yeah.
found the most accurate pre-game source in the world.
Listen, Chris, I completely agree. We're gonna have to maybe monetize this next year. Give people something that they want. But we do have a couple minutes left. I want to talk about Aaron Rodgers, Chris. Reports are out today. He is not expected to return to the New York Jets next year. Reported by the NFL. Surprised by this, Chris?
No, I think when Aaron Glenn made his statement and said this is not about Aaron Rodgers, this is about the team, that's pretty much when it was pretty much over. I just don't know what Aaron Rodgers is trying to get out of this. I don't know where he could go. I don't know where they would want him without all the drama and all the crap and somehow expect all-star level production. I mean, he really only showed his Aaron Rodgers self throughout the last couple games. And partially, I think he rushed himself off the injury. I think being a 40-something-year-old, he should have waited a couple months. It wouldn't have done anything. In the end, they didn't make the playoffs anyway. And now what's happened is he's put himself in a nasty situation where he doesn't really have much to do. He sort of forced his own hand, but he doesn't know where his hand takes him. He doesn't have any cards with him. So he's sort of like just wandering out there in the darkness, hoping someone's going to pick him up. Well, I know for sure San Francisco ain't going to pick him up. I know the Vikings ain't going to pick him up. And so who's going to pick him up? The Saints? I mean, come on.
The Raiders?
I don't think he'll be the Raiders either, because
Steelers?
Pete Carroll has a strong personality, and Mike Tomlin's not going to tolerate shenanigans. He's already got George Pickens and Antonio Brown that he's dealt with, and he knows how
I
that
think
goes.
Aaron Rodgers and George Pickens would be such a fascinating QBWR
Extremely
combination.
fascinating. I don't know how productive.
Yeah, listen, I'm not too surprised by the Aaron Rodgers move either. I think sort of with the Aaron Glenn head coaching, I think that sort of pivots the Jets into a new direction, with what was a very limited Aaron Rodgers era and a very disappointing Aaron Rodgers era, which is very short-lived. But I think most people were sort of looking at it as a 2, possibly 3-year shelf life, and obviously one of those years was held back due to injury.
This really feels like the KD Harden Kyrie, Brooklyn, that super team hopes, and it sort of really never went nowhere. Everyone was sort of
Chris,
injured.
I don't like doing cross-sport comparisons, but I don't think
Everyone
this
was
Jets team was
injured.
anywhere near as talented as that Nets team. There's no way.
This Jets team had some real talent, Luca. Let's be honest. You had Garrett Wilson. You had a lot of really good defensive studs here. But in terms of
You're
aging
wrong,
talent,
Chris. Well, so you're right about defensive studs, but you're wrong about the comparison. All right, you're dead wrong. You're dead wrong. Harden coming off an MVP, still a prime KD. Like Kyrie, like they were all like pretty much in their primes,
and
essentially.
it didn't work. The point being is it didn't work.
It didn't work, but they at least made the playoffs. KD was a toenail away from sending him, to the conference finals, who they would have versed Atlanta, and they would have maybe won the championship. And the Rodgers Jets won, 5 games in the end? Like,
Something like that.
something like that. But listen, Chris, that is all we have time for today. I will say, actually, one more thing, is if Aaron Rodgers were to join a team, where do you want to see him go? If he were.
Well, what are my options? I don't
Anyone.
exactly remember off my head who really needs quarterback right now.
Oh, well, like I said, you got the Raiders, you got the Steelers, you got the Giants,
So
you got,
are you talking
the 49ers
are you talking
maybe.
without off-field issues?
I'm just talking about Aaron Rodgers, the player. I mean, I guess.
So simply purely field performance.
Sure, fine. Yeah, let's go with that. Where do you?
I will put him in the 49ers,
Yeah, okay, fair.
right? But the issue is he just causes too much trouble off field.
Yeah, for me, 49ers or Vikings. I like, and even the Steelers have a great defense, but yeah, I think with those like head coaches that are offensive, like powerhouses, LaFleur, who had Rodgers and he had those MVP seasons, came from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. So like the 49ers, I think is an obvious destination.
Luka,
Whatever
if
happens
you
with
remember,
Purdy.
Rodgers had real problems with LaFleur because it was a sort of a new trendy offense.
Yes,
It
yes.
wasn't what he was used to.
But I think at this
So-
point in his career, I think Rodgers can be humbled a little bit by Kyle if he goes there.
Can he? That's
I
the
think
real
so.
problem, Luka. He has not been able to be humbled so far into his career.
Well,
he
this
has not
year
been able
should
to
be
be
very
humbled.
humbling for him. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, I would feel very humbled.
I agree.
I agree completely as well, Chris. Well, listen, thank you, Chris, for this episode of Priceless Takes. And Chris, I'm not sure when I'll see you next because we're probably going to be pivoting into NBA season. There will be definitely a free agency episode for all the fans out there who want to see more of us. And if there's any other big NFL news, we will definitely be on it. But Chris, thank you for being on the show with me. I'm going to definitely get you involved, again, as time comes. And we have the whole NFL season next year as well. For those of you that only started watching just recently, Chris only joined us 5 or 6 weeks ago, pumped out a few episodes. But Chris, thank you for your contribution. I really enjoyed having you on here, and I hope you enjoyed talking some football with me.
No problem, Luka. It's been really enjoyable getting to talk some knowledgeable football, getting some takes down, nailing some things. And I think we work well off each other. So I think we've made some pretty decent content. And Philadelphia is the city of champions once again.
They are the City of Champions, Chris, and we will be covering it much more on our Priceless Takes social media channel, so make sure to stick around. Follow on us on Instagram, on TikTok. We are at the handle at Priceless Takes. Links will be posted in the description. Chris, go Birds! That
Go
is
Birds.
the theme for this episode. Feels good to be right. I am your host, Luka Price. That is all for this episode of Priceless Takes, and we will see you next time.